It's episode 14 of the Wild Paw Dog Podcast with Karen Wild and John Buskell. So it's time to continue the adventures of me and Karen into the wonderful world of dogs. This is the podcast that looks at all things canine, from behaviour, training, celebrity dog news and a few bits of tips and tricks. This week we've got a bit more on the British dog law, some celebrity dog news, and a question that I've got about barking. Hi Karen, how you doing?
Hi John, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Still drowning in snow here.
Oh my goodness, yeah. I think you said earlier that you're up to, how tall are you? 6'3"?
Yeah.
And the snow's up to your knees, so
Yeah.
That's a lot of snow.
That's a lot of snow, and it's also this morning. It's about -10, -12. So when I was out with the wolves, I noticed that their paws they were not particularly happy.
No, I can imagine. -12. Gosh, I mean, I think we had some very low temperatures over Christmas, but I don't even think we got that close. I don't know, but we've just got mud, and a bit more mud right now. So, and can I just add on for any of our listeners who are in Australia, particularly those around about Queensland, round about Brisbane, my own brother is out there at the moment, and I know you've got terrible floods. And my sister-in-law was telling me that a lot of people, because they've been rescued, they've not been allowed to take their pets with them. And, you know, it sent a shiver down my spine, the thought of having to leave dogs behind. Yeah, because they're getting the people out. And so, you know, and it's horrible that the people have died as well. And, I you know, it's absolutely horrible. My heart goes out to you. And if you're out there, you know, we are really thinking of you. We really are. So, you know, please, you know, let us know if you've got any news from there. We want some good news, you know, if we can. And just, it's devastating. So my heart really does go out to you. And I'm sure everyone who's listening will think the same.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So fingers crossed that the situation improves out there.
Well, they're saying that, you know, it's reached its peak and hopefully it's dying off. My brother's going out this weekend to help people sort of who are struggling. So that's you know, really nice, because he's fortunately where they live is in a bit of a raised area. So they haven't been affected, but all around them is very badly affected. So, you know, it is the people, and I do think people come first. But obviously, if you've had to leave your pet, especially leaving your dog behind, must be just devastating as well. So, you know, so let's count our blessings.
Absolutely. Well, before we get on with that dog law stuff, I have a question myself, Karen. I think there's that sort of old story that, you know, the children of psychologists and psychiatrists are always the most messed up. Oops, did I just offend 1,000 people there? I think
my children are all messed up then, thanks.
But I think the other thing is that, you know, people who are dog trainers or have experience with dog training, you know, they're not immune from having problems with their dogs themselves. And one of the things that I've got at the moment, you know, here's my situation. I've got the 3 big wolves after we lost Bernard. So I've got Winnie, Aggie and Tia here, who are, you know, fine, very calm, typical Bassets that sleep all day, apart from their hour-and-a-half walks. And then I've got these 3 pups who are coming up to 5 months. And Smudge and Digby, they're fine. They're very, very calm. But Dearborn, who I'm calling Oscar the Grouch at times, or possibly Monster, he is driving me crazy. He is barking, and it's driving me barking mad, Karen. And I've tried everything, you know.
Everything.
Well, you know, the old clicker training, you know, I'm trying to click him when he's doing fine, when he's not barking. I've tried to put the bark on cue, because he's actually an intelligent dog, and I'm getting nowhere. So what do I do, Karen?
I you know, barking is one of those things, because it's like everything that dogs do. It's usually, I say everything, most things they do are usually a normal behaviour that is unacceptable to us. So you could say, well, every dog barks, but this is excessive barking. So what we'd need to do, because it, you know, let's face it, the dogs are living with people. So we do need to take a look at how to deal with it. You know, I would say all dogs bark. I haven't found a dog that doesn't. Some dogs bark more than others. So sometimes it can be that it is basically they are born to be quite vocal. Now, that's not always the case. It's very, very important with this kind of problem that you get to the bottom of what it's all about. So what I tend to do, if people ask me about this, and they ask me about lots of different things as well, and I tend to throw more questions out than give answers first of all. Obviously, the first thing that I always say to everyone, and I know that you will have taken care of this already, but for the benefit of everyone listening, if you've got a persistent problem that you feel is out of the ordinary, you must get your dog checked by your vet. The first thing, any dog showing any signs of stress or distress, it could be that there is something the matter. If you mention to your vet the problem, don't just take the dog to the vet and go check it over. Explain that there is a problem that you're concerned about, and they will check over the dog in relation to that problem. So if it's barking and the dog is barking a lot of the time, then what that says to me is I would be asking the question, is the dog distressed? Is it in pain? Is it ill? That would be my first thing that I would look at. Once the vet's had a chance to say that, no, I can't see anything wrong. It can see fine, it can hear fine. There's nothing physically causing it pain that I can see. Bearing in mind, vets can't give, they can't give every answer, but the first port of call, any behaviour problem like that you see is quite severe, you should get the dog checked over by your vet.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you need,
I'm going to say, well, obviously, Karen, I'm in quite close contact with my vet. As a breeder, I have a really good, very, very good relationship with Vallentuna Djurklinik, if anyone in Sweden or the Stockholm region is listening. And what I do is, I've talked to them and he, he's had a good look. And what we've decided is that because he doesn't constantly bark, it's only when he's in the dog room. Because I have a dog room, because, I have my own communications business to run, I have client stuff to do. And although I'm very lucky to be able to have a big office, here at home, to be able to sort of work with the dogs, I need to be able to put them away, to go to meetings and not drive people in the neighbourhood mad with big dogs barking.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So I mean, if I put him in the dog room, and for his own safety, because, I've got these 3 big dogs as well, and they're incredibly calm, and I've never really had any major problems. But of course, with a young pup, you can't leave a young pup. I can't go away to a meeting and leave him within playing distance with 3 big dogs. Because imagine 3 pups and 3 big dogs. The big dogs, it would drive them mad. And particularly Aggie, although she'll put them in place, for their own safety, I can't do it. But as soon as as soon as he goes into his pen, and I'd just like to make it very clear here that it's not a tiny box. He's got plenty of room. There's a big dog bed in there. There's 2 rugs. There's a bowl of water. There's toys, bones, everything. But as soon as he goes in there, and I've worked really hard to make it, feel like a really special place for them. As soon as he goes in there, that's when the barking starts.
Right. Okay. So, like I say, I tend to throw out more questions initially. The first thing I would be asking myself, which you've pretty much answered, is when and where does the barking occur? So if you are somebody listening to the podcast as well, and you're thinking, yeah, I have this problem, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, well, when is it happening and where? And it's useful to keep a diary, especially if you're about to see somebody who's going to help you with the problem. If we've got a diary, a list of when the dog does it, when the dog doesn't do it, because as an owner, you tend to be emotionally involved. So things can seem a lot more frequent when they're not. And sometimes it depends on your annoyance level at that time. You think, oh, the dog barked all afternoon. Well, maybe actually it only barked twice, but those were times that were significantly nuisance times. You were on the phone, or it was important that everything else was quiet. So that is the first question. So once you've established that in detail, the next part of it is to look at who or what is the target of the barking. Now, in your case, we can't sort of do a full consult here, I know, but I would be looking at, well, okay, if the only time he goes into the dog room is when he starts to bark, is it that he doesn't like the dog room, or the other dogs are going to beat him up and he's not keen about that, or that he's separated from you? Because remember that some dogs are very focused on people and their owners in particular, and certainly in separation cases it has been shown that even if a dog has other dogs with it, it can still show signs of separation anxiety, which can include barking. Now that is because the dog has priorities in its own head, of it, what makes a good resource. And generally in some dogs' cases, and hopefully in most dogs' cases, but certainly in some, the owner is a very big resource, and to be separated from that is quite a significant event for that dog. So it might be, and then you'd go off down a whole other raft of questions about how attached the dog is to you. It might be that the dog is barking as an effort to reunite with you. So that is another issue that you might want to explore. So we're talking about, where does it happen? When does it happen? Why are they, what are they barking at? It could be that the dog's barking because it's hearing noises and it's not comfortable with those noises. So you need to establish. So on your little chart, John, when you're filling this out, what is the target of the barking, or who?
Yeah, I mean, this is what it is, Karen. I mean, I can see that myself, and I do keep diaries. Apart from being compulsive obsessive, I think as a breeder, you have to have everything documented. You have to know when, your dog came into season. You have to know when you've given them any kind of medication. And I've learned from breeding dogs that, the more data you have, it gives you a better understanding. I mean, I can see that, if he goes into the dog room, I mean, he does focus on me. The only other times that he barks, it's when I'm about to feed him and then he gets excited, or if he goes out into the toileting area that I have out the back here, a secured pen where they can't get away. I'm just trying to make sure that anyone listening here doesn't think I'm putting my dogs in any danger. No, when he goes out there, if he goes out there on his own, the barking starts almost immediately. So, I mean, it's very clearly separation angst. But
so the next question is, and you've kind of answered that in your example, is what triggers the barking. So the triggers in your case from what you've described so far would be you leaving the dog, the food appearing on the horizon, and the dog being put out in a pen again, possibly not 100%, but that the dog is going to be left again. And he's probably if he is very fixated on you. Now, this is going to interest you, John. If you try and train the dog and do a one-to-one with your clicker, the issue is then that the dog is bonding even more closely with you than he was already. Now, that's not, I say, we're talking around the subject here. I'm not giving you advice here, but do consider that there are ways to teach your dog to be self-reliant. So if you focus in on a problem, what you might end up with is actually compounding the bigger issue if you're not careful. It may not be that, but that is something that you could end up with. You end up with the dog being more dependent on cues from you than not. And if it is a separation issue and the dog's very strongly attached to you, you do have to look at maybe other alternatives. And there are lots of alternative ways of getting a dog to be self-reliant, rewarding them for not barking, but perhaps a little bit distanced from you as a person. I should just say, guys, if you can hear a little bell in the background, we put a little bell on my kitten's collar, and I don't really go for bells on cats' collars, but that's what you can hear in the background. He's trying to climb up my leg.
But bells aside, that's a really interesting comment, and I think this is one of the reasons why we'd really like to have questions and observations, comments from listeners to the show, because if I think one of the things is that you have an enormous amount of experience as a trainer, Karen. My own experience as a breeder and as a qualified clicker trainer, that takes us to but I think the level of the conversation here, I mean, I'm thinking from a listening point of view, it's very, very interesting to go into this. But when when you said about the training that I'm doing is reaffirming the bonding. It's exactly what I can see when you said that. The penny dropped, and of course, if I put up, because he does calm down if he's with one of the other bigger dogs, and that in itself might be problematic, because I mean, he's not a dog that I plan to keep. I can't. I mean, 3 pups. I'd like to keep all 3, but I don't think my wife would appreciate it. But I mean, the thing is that he has to be trained to go to a home where he could potentially be on his own.
Be the only dog, absolutely. And I think as a breeder, then that is your responsibility. As you know, I mean, these are the things that owners need to hear. If you've got a dog that you think, look, I actually think this dog is going to be better in a home with another dog. Or I've got a feeling that this dog may become highly dependent on you as owners. And I do recommend that you make sure he does have time alone sometimes and that he enjoys that time alone. And I would start, to invest that training from day one or from now, Can this dog survive on his own? Well, he doesn't think he can. So let's try and improve that element of things. So it's an identification process. I may have got it wrong, but part of what I do in my job, and part of what we all do, is sort of try and pick apart the scenario. You mentioned earlier about data, and I think that's a very revealing word. If, like I said, I sort of touched on it a minute ago, but if you have a situation where you're very, very close to it and you really, really care about your animals, the problem can be that you just cannot see the wood for the trees because they're yours. So when you said right at the start of the podcast about, oh, that's the cat again, about, I've lost my thread because the dogs just jumped at the cat and they're playing now, about when it's your dog, you can't always see the problem because dog trainers themselves have problems. That's the same for everyone. And when you hear it back to you, a lot of my clients will say, do you know what? I can't believe I didn't notice that. It's common sense. And you think, yeah, maybe that's true. But because you're so close to it, you just can't see it. You've got other things on your mind and goodness me, forgive yourself. It's okay. We don't always see what's right in front of us. The next thing that I want to look at on my question list would be, what is the dog seeking to achieve through the barking? So why is the dog barking? What is their motivation for barking? So like I touched upon, is it that he's trying to get the owner to come back?
Oh, absolutely.
Is it that there's a sound and they're barking at that? Or, and the interesting thing again with more than one dog in the household, are they setting each other off? I had a very interesting consultation the other day with somebody who owns more than one dog. And what's basically happening from what I can see is that one dog is very nervous but quiet. The other dog is sort of fairly young and active. And the other dog is an older dog and just kind of wants to sleep all the time. And it's the older dog that wants to sleep all the time that's barking. And we touched upon maybe the active dog is hearing the sounds and getting agitated. The nervous dog is then picking up on that and saying, what's the matter? Why? What's the matter? What's the matter? And both of those dogs are then getting agitated. And the third dog is saying, I really can't cope with all of this. Can we just have a bit of peace and quiet around here? So you can't put thoughts into their head and you can't read their minds, but you can make a kind of plan in your head of, right, if it is this problem, then if we separate this out from this and try and deal with that as a problem, does it improve? And you have to be quite scientific about it if you can, because that's what gives you the best result. And the next thing I wanted to say is looking at patterns in the barking behaviour, because that's, again, what I've just described. So as we go through the problem, as you can see, all these areas start to become clearer. Again, we may not get the right solution, but it's certainly very important to go through these things.
Karen, do you have any resources on your website that people can look at to get some information about this?
I do have a barking sheet. Now, I can put up the barking screen question list on the show notes, and I'll do that, and I'll make it that you can have that as a little freebie. When it comes down to what to do about it, that is the crucial part, because if you incorrectly identify what the problem is, you aren't necessarily going to deal with it. So when someone says to me, I've tried everything and it's still not working, what I then think is, okay, we've got several choices here, but either have they picked the wrong thing to do about it? Have they incorrectly identified the problem? Or are they being ineffective in what they're trying to do to sort it out? So those things are more down to the expertise of somebody who really knows what they're doing. But I do have a more general handout on the site which talks about what you can do, ways to teach your dog to bark on command, which is a great skill because you can then switch it off. And a little bit of explanation about why dogs bark, what it's all about, and what, again, guidelines to help you steer your way into a solution. Putting it into practice sometimes can be difficult because it's very hard to control the environment around you.
Sure.
But in your case, if it does turn out that it's to do with you leaving, coming back, leaving, then that's an easier thing to control in some ways. It's not an immediate thing, though. I think barking problems, you need to give yourself a while to get them sorted.
No quick
weeks.
Fixes. Yeah, no quick fixes.
No. You generally see it increases before it ends, because what the dog's learned is, if I bark, then as a result of that, something happens. And usually, if the barking problem is getting worse, whatever the consequence of the barking is favourable to the dog.
Oh, Karen,
so they bark, they get...
We're talking about extinction bursts here.
Yeah, exactly, extinction bursts.
Where it intensifies before it disappears.
Exactly. Just as if you've got kids, you know, if they have a tantrum because they can't have something, they will follow you around and have the tantrum at your feet, and they will cry harder and louder and more determined to make you do whatever it is before they finally give up. Everybody does it. It doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. In the supermarket, if your card doesn't, do you remember when you used to have to swipe the credit card?
Yeah.
And, the person on the till swipes the card and maybe it doesn't work. They don't immediately stop and start punching the number in of the card. What they do is they swipe it again, and then they swipe it a bit slower, and then they swipe it quicker, and they kind of look around them and maybe press a buzzer. That is an extinction burst. It used to work. Hang on a minute, it's not working. I must do it more to see if it really does work. So, and I bet you, if we think about it, we can all come up with lots of examples of when we ourselves do that as well. So that is a normal part of learning.
Well, there are some brilliant tips there, Karen. The resources that you mentioned, well, they'll be with the show notes for this podcast, number 14. But you can also go to Karen's website, which is intellidogs.co.uk, and check out some of the put together your own training manuals that are there to purchase from Karen, which are excellent ways of getting some of Karen's brilliant insights into helping you improve what you do with your dogs.
Thank you very much. For they're only $2.99 for a chapter, and you can pick and choose what you want. And then I think if you buy 3 or more, you get a discount. But the reason we do these podcasts, the reason the blog is free, everything is free on that side of things, is we do have to fund what we do, and then that's just a given. But the whole point of what we're doing is to try and improve everybody's existence with their dog. That's really matters to me. And I'm not just saying that. I don't say things I don't mean. So, if there's something there that you can, it gets you thinking and it can help you, that's what the blog and the podcast is all about. And then if you decide you want to buy something off the back of that, fine. I mean, if everyone who listened to this podcast all bought something, we'd be rolling, be really happy. But that's not what it's about. It's about sharing the information. So pass it along. If you think what we're talking about is useful, pass it along. Please pass it along.
And of course, if you have any questions about what's happening with your dog, any training issues that you'd like us to discuss on the show, you can send us an email to
podcast@karenwild.co.uk, or you can grab me on Twitter, which is www.twitter.com/Wild Paw, WILDPAW, and I'm usually on Twitter most of the time, so I'll probably reply to you and say hello. So please do get in touch.
Okay, Karen, let's move on to this whole question of dog law. Just looking at the time, as we try and keep the show to about 30 minutes. We've talked loads about my dog there and barking issues. But, we said last time that we'd talk a bit more about the dog law in the UK. So, can you tell us some more about that?
Yeah, I thought it would be useful. We had some great feedback on the last podcast about identification tags, and I've got some extra links for those of you who are worried about the weight of a tag on your dog. Somebody sent me this morning a great link for some lightweight plastic engravable tags, and they're nice. They're not ugly, so they're very lightweight. So if you've got a tiny dog, by all means go to the I don't make any money from the link. I don't know who sells them, but you can still search for others and shop around. But this link in particular, I just thought, well, that's really handy, so I'm going to put that on the show notes as well. Now, the other thing is, a lot of people, if you're anything like me in the neighbourhood, known as somebody who has dogs, or certainly in my case as trains dogs, I tend to get brought every dog that gets found in the village. And I thought it would be useful, because we are out walking our dogs and you quite often find dogs running loose, what to do about it and what is the law in England and Wales again. But, what do you do if you find a stray dog? Where are your responsibilities? So if you find a dog running loose, obviously if it's got a tag, most of us are going to make an effort to try and do something about it, ring up the owner, grab the mobile phone number, whatever. But if if the dog is cute, I mean, look at Nicola Tappenden, who was, she's our, she did the interview for the advent calendar. She's a celeb over here. She had her little dog Twinkle went missing from the groomer was looking after it. Dog went missing. What we're hoping in some ways is that the dog got found. He's very tiny and cute, got found, got taken in. Now, does he automatically become the property of that person? The answer is no. If you find a dog running around and you decide to take it in, the first duty you have, you must let the local authority know, the dog warden. It's no longer the business of the police. if you find a stray dog. So if you ring the police and they say, we don't want to know, that's actually because the law on that has been repealed. So, it was Section 3 of the Dogs Act 1906, for those of you who are geeky and want to know these things. So that used to provide the police with the power to seize stray dogs. That's no longer the case, unless the dog is at risk of causing a road traffic accident, in which case, really, the police should come and deal with it. So if you find a stray dog, it's not yours. It's not finders keepers. If you decide to be a finder of the dog, then again, you have certain responsibilities. So you must return the dog to the owner, or you must take the dog to the officer of the local authority for the area in which the dog was found. So you do have responsibilities. Now, some of us might think, well, I don't really want to take on the responsibility. If it's out of hours and your local authority hasn't got anyone to call, which they don't have to, because the law says where practicable, which means they don't have to do it. They are advised to do it, but they don't have to. Then you're going to be stuck with the dog. Most nice people wouldn't want the dog to be running around, but you can be a reporter as opposed to a finder. But once you find the dog, you then have those responsibilities on you. So do remember that if you find a stray, it's on the whole better for the dog if you can look after it until it's returned, but it doesn't become yours. And even if the dog is found by you, taken to rescue, it's not the property of the rescue because the owner hasn't given permission. If you find it and ask the local authority, can I keep it? They have to treat it like a stray. So it's not guaranteed that they're going to give you the dog. They don't have to give you the dog. So there are certain things to do with ownership that you have to be quite careful about.
I think one of the things there is that, of course, you're talking about British dog law. For me, this is completely different. Sweden, it's, we don't have such clear rules. It's not exactly super publicised. Anyone that has a dog and is registered with the Kennel Club, and most people do that here, automatically get a magazine every other month. And that's quite good in sort of promoting, well-being for your dog and caring for your dog and, some of the official sides, but we don't really have a clear channel. How in Britain is this information got out to the general public other than the Wild Paw Dog Podcast?
Well, it isn't really. It's there. There are websites, a DEFRA website, and there are sites there to say about the law. But generally, the course that I went on Monday, there was an awful lot of confusion in the room. There were representatives from rescues, from local authorities. There were dog wardens there. There were behaviourists and trainers like myself. And there were lots of differing views, and there were situations where people had found a dog, tried to hand it in, they hadn't been able to. The police had said nothing to do with us. The local authority had said we're closed. What do you do with the dog? Where are you supposed to put it? But the way that the law works, they can legally and lawfully do that because a local authority does have to provide a dog warden, but they don't necessarily have to provide a 24-hour service because it's not practicable to them, which means they may not have the funding, and as soon as there's cuts in funding, things are trimmed off. The main point about the law is, the stray dog should be reunited with its owner as quickly as possible, which takes us back again to the dog identification thing. So it would just be so much easier for all the authorities and everyone if you've just got a collar on the dog with your address on it and your phone number on the back. With your name, address, phone number. That's the whole point about what we're doing. And I do support microchipping. I think it's very important. But just to have a tag on saying this dog is microchipped, like I said last week, it's not going to help me if I find a dog. So, I think try and be, the point of the law is to be sensible. Some of the laws are a bit silly. Some of them are a bit out of date, but they are there for a purpose. And the purpose is to protect the owners, because a dog is a chattel, it's a possession. Cats law not the same. Cats don't count, but a dog does count. So it's a way of getting the dog back to you or the dog back to its owner.
I think in many respects we're talking, preaching to the converted here. If you're listening to the Wild Paw Dog Podcast and you find a stray dog, or your neighbour finds a stray dog and it needs to stay somewhere. Those of us that have got dogs, we know how to take care of a dog. We'll take it in. I've known in the neighbourhood that if anything happens with someone's dog, if there's a problem, people come and ask me all the time. But I do think one of the things that we could do as a community of dog lovers is to make, to take it upon ourselves to remind those people around us in our networks who don't have dogs of this kind of law, of how to act, of what they could do. If we're searching on the internet how to look after a stray dog. Well, those of us that work with dogs or have dogs, we pretty much know where to go, what to do. But I think for people that have no experience of dogs, they would probably go to the police. I mean, in the UK, I'm assuming they'd automatically turn to the police. So I do think, let's spread the word, folks, whether we're in Sweden, Alabama, or Bradford.
Yeah, and I think, the laws is changing as well. So, like I said before, a sort of slight disclaimer here is that I'm not a solicitor, and I'm not a police representative. And so, I am going on what we have been presented to us, and there is opinion in there. If you're struggling on the legal side of it, you need to get a legal representative and talk it over with them. But it's just useful to know. Sometimes you get into this dilemma. What do I do? Who do I speak to? Who's the best person? Why won't the police take this dog? Well, because they don't have to, because the law says they don't have to. That's your answer, So sometimes it can be a bit more of a comfort, especially when you come into contact with lots and lots of dogs, to know, okay, this is where I stand on this,
All right, Karen, as we've been going quite a while now, I think we need to talk about Johnny Depp.
I found some celebrity dog news which made me laugh. Well, I shouldn't laugh. And I was scouring the internet for a bit of weird and wonderful. And I decided not to report on the dog that ate a man's ear after his girlfriend had bitten it off. Can you imagine?
Sorry, having a fit.
I know, I've made it pop. And that was here in, I think it was Yorkshire. Not here in Yorkshire, but here in the UK in Yorkshire. Yuck. Not a very nice thing to happen. Yeah. And just the mind boggles, the responses I got off Twitter for that were just so funny, thinking, anyway, it's not funny for the man, so how horrible. But anyway, instead, I bring you Johnny Depp has admitted that he had to be rescued from Angela Jolie's dog. Now, Johnny Depp is, he's a really well-known actor, isn't he? And they were in a film together. And he's not a dog fan at all, he says. But he did agree to watch the dog so that Brad and Angelina could go out, apparently. And he didn't really like it because he said it's a really big bulldog. And he said the dog smelt terrible. Now, the dog is called Jacques. So anyway, he said Jacques smelt horrible. And he told himself, that he would survive one night. And to quote, everything was cool until I sat down on the bed to take my shoes off. Jacques pounced on me from behind and kept jumping around on me. He's not small. Around 175 pounds of dog was hurled at me, which felt like 300 pounds. I shouted for help, and luckily someone came to take that beast off me. Now, I've been jumped around on by big dogs, so I sympathise. But if you don't like dogs either, and it's a good job he's not in the UK because the dog would have been, hauled into court, and so would the owner, and, all these things. But I just think, they may be celebrities, they may be famous movie stars and all those things, but they're just as human as we are.
And can't control their dogs.
And, he offered to look after the dog, and they're probably, taking the shoes off is a big trigger, and sitting down and bringing yourself down to the dog's level is another trigger. So, poor old Johnny Depp.
I wonder if Angelina gave him a list of things of do's and don'ts. Because one of the things that I do, I don't really like my dogs going and staying with other people. I mean, of course, I have so many that you can't really do that. But I think one of the things that I do is that I go and, I give if anyone looks after one of my dogs, I give them a piece of paper that says, this is how they'll tell you that they need to go to the loo. This is when to feed them. This is how to prepare the food. I mean, it does make me sound, obsessive compulsive again. But, I do think that, if Angelina and Brad had said, Johnny, thanks for looking after the dog, but, when you sit down on the bed, he does have a tendency to pounce.
Yeah. Or think in advance. Johnny Depp doesn't really get on with dogs, or he's admitted he's not a fan. So therefore, they've got a very large example of a dog. So therefore, if you're not a fan of dogs, this could be a bit of a problem. And who's going to get more stressed? If the person watching the dog is going to get stressed, the dog's going to get stressed. So if you care more about the dog, then you don't want the dog to get stressed anyway. So let's just pop the dog in the kitchen. Yeah. Or, I just think poor old, we're sort of having a bit of a chuckle. But if he was genuinely terrified, that could have been quite nasty.
Yeah.
And doesn't matter the size of the dog. I've had people freeze when a tiny dog's walked into the room because they just don't like dogs. So maybe he shouldn't have volunteered in the first place. No. Maybe there could have been controls put in place. He was fine. It was just a little anecdote. But I just think, look, everybody's human, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely.
And dogs are dogs.
Yeah.
We think celebrity dog, they must have lots of money, they must have dog wranglers everywhere. Well, they're just pets.
Fair enough. I think if you're listening to this show and you've had someone look after one of your dogs, and if something has gone really well, why did it go well? Or if something went wrong, what do you think the cause for that going wrong was? Or if you have any tips or tricks about how to prepare non-doggy people for looking after your favourite pooch, why don't you email Karen at podcast@karenwild.co.uk or send her a tweet on Twitter, and that's twitter.com Karen Wild. And not Karen Wild, Wild Paw, twitter.com/Wild Paw.
Oh. And Pickles is calling us to a close, I think.
Well, Pickles. Yes, that does sound about like the end of the show. What are we going to be talking about next time, Karen?
Well, sorry, just pushing the door to you there because I don't want Pickles to interrupt. One of the things that I do get asked about a lot is when dogs meet other dogs when they're out. And I wanted to talk about dogs, not necessarily just that, but dogs that bite. So at the risk of sounding a bit like Jeremy Kyle, who's a sort of, Jeremy Kyle presents a reality, quite horrible, bit like Jerry Springer debate show on telly, and it's a bit shouty, but they always ask for your stories. So if you have a dog that bites, or you might have been bitten by a dog yourself, or maybe you've got a dog in your neighborhood with a bit of a reputation, or is it your dog that's got the bad rap, is it your dog that's got a bad reputation but actually unfounded? I want to hear from you. I want to hear what your story is, and we're going to talk about that in the podcast next week.
All right, Karen, I think that's a wrap for this week. We'll be back next week with lots of advice and discussions about dogs that bite. See you then, Karen.
Bye.